Alrighty, everyone. So welcome. So we're at 11 o'clock. So in the interest of everyone's time, we'll go ahead and get started. But of course, as folks continue to join, no problem as well too. If I can ask to, just make sure your microphones are muted and remain so throughout. And then at the end of, again too, we'll have our Q&A section as well too. So if you have the advantage of seeing the group chat, please feel free to use that. You can message the group, say some hellos. You can message privately as well too. And then throughout the presentation, if any slides in particular spark a thought, feel free to type that in here as well too, and then I'll help moderate as well too and field those questions to Kim so that she can just focus on her presentation as well. So again, happy Monday, happy start to a brand new week. Looks like it's going to be pretty warm this week too towards the end, so that's always a good thing compared to what we had Saturday, right? So this is, of course, this presentation is HR issues, and it's going to tackle the questions of, what does that return to work process look like after this COVID-19 shutdown, this pandemic period? And what are some of the HR issues that many businesses either are encountering right now or will be very soon? And Kim will get into those, of course. But I did want to read her bio before we started as well, too, in case she's not a familiar face to me yet. But she's very familiar to us at the Chamber. She comes to a lot of our One More Customer events, and we're very glad to have her and her expertise. So Kimberly Lundy is a visionary executive with more than 20 years of human resources experience meeting and surpassing company targets. Ms. Lundy is the CEO, and founder of Lundy HR Consulting, LLC, where she utilizes her experience working in the behavioral health, biotech, pharmaceutical, government contracting, engineering, technology, financial services, higher education, and nonprofit organizations. She has direct experience developing and leading global change management programs, strategy, benefits, compensation, talent management, training and development, performance succession planning, compliance, risk management, employee relations, and diversity EEO, affirmative action compliance programs. Ms. Lundy is adept in employment law, legal analysis, union/grievance avoidance, mediation, employee relations, conflict resolution, mediation, risk management, and strategy. So Kim has had a lot of experience, of course, too. She's a wealth of knowledge. But prior to Lundy HR Consulting LLC, Ms. Lundy served in multiple executive level roles in human resource management field, to include being the former Chief of Human Resources for a behavioral health organization called Waystation Incorporated, and serving on the executive HR leadership team for Shepherd Pratt Hospital. She's worked in the federal contracting industries for leading organizations to include BAE Systems, C2 Essentials, Marconi, Tracker, and worked with the DoD, the DOJ, DHS, and the United Kingdom Ministry of Defense. So lots of credentials that I'm sure Kim would love to touch on as well too. So Kim, thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us. And without further ado, I'll kick it off to you.
Wonderful. Well, good morning. Thank you for having me. It's really a pleasure and an honor to be here this morning with you. So as Tim said, we're going to talk about HR issues and some of the things that we'll be facing basically when we reopen businesses. So for today's agenda, I wanted to take a few minutes to look back as to what was life prior to COVID-19. It sort of consumed us for these last several weeks, but we won't spend a whole lot of time there. The bulk of our time will be spent on, the fact that we're about to open up business, what that looks like, what are some of our concerns, things to consider. We'll go over frequently asked questions and of course, open it up to the group. So prior to COVID-19, 34% of the employers didn't have an emergency preparedness plan. Of those that did have the plan, only half didn't cover communicable diseases, which is the very thing that we're dealing with right now. 7 in 10 employers were struggling with the way to work remotely, and 2 in 3 employers state that trying to maintain morale is really a challenge in this COVID-19 process. So the reason that I wanted to take a couple of minutes just to kind of level set, if you will, and look back is to really first and foremost say you're not alone. Most people are exactly where you are today, and it's okay. We'll get through this. So again, we're about to reopen business. What do? First thing is to really acknowledge that even though we're opening businesses for some, it's not going to be the same thing as when you left. Things are not going to go back to a normal. It's going to be a new normal. And so we need to really begin to grasp, what is that new normal going to look like? So some things to consider before, before even opening up. The CDC has put out some guidelines and 3 preliminary questions that every single business owner needs to ask themselves before reopening. The first thing is, are you in a community that's no longer requiring mitigation? Here in the DC metro area, we have, Pennsylvania, Maryland, we have Virginia, we have DC, we have West Virginia, all hitting our borders. Each one of those states has their own governor, and each one of those governors will decide whether or not there's mitigation that needs to happen, and whether non-essential employees are able to even start to commute again. And so with that in mind, you have to look at where you're drawing your employees from. Are your non-essential employees in your geographical area that you're working in, and therefore you're able to follow those rules? Or are they living outside of their area, commuting into your area, which can impact whether or not they're able to even come to work? You also have to look at protective measures for your employees, particularly those who are at higher risk. And there's so many people that fall in that category, whether someone is struggling with diabetes, asthma, for example. All of these are things where they may fall in a higher risk group. And you have to think about, well, what can I do as an employer to help them? For example, is this a person that needs to continue teleworking even though the business is still open? Or is there protective equipment that I need to make sure that I have on hand for those individuals, just to name a few? As you go down this path, it's so important to take a couple of minutes to stop and take an inventory and figure out where you are on this continuum. We're dealing with this personally, not only in our family lives, but then we're trying on top of that run a business and try to carry the hope for that business. And so it's important for us to realize, deal with our own emotions a little bit so that we can bring our A game or our best self to our employees. They need us right now. It's okay to have concerns, but you don't want to try to let yourself stay in panic mode, because again, we have to lead by example, carry the peace, because people are going to look to us and they tend to feed off of what they see. So again, it's important to stop, demonstrate concern for your employees. Not only look at them as, okay, this is just an employee who produces a widget, if you will, but as a person, are they okay? Are their families okay? Those couple of minutes that you spend is invaluable, because again, it's going to help them feel valued as a person. It's going to help them to stay engaged and help them to be more productive because they feel that you care. Acknowledge their concerns, be able to respond to their concerns. It's going to be really important. In this time, it's really important as business leaders to make a choice, to embrace our current situation. Don't let it keep you in panic mode, but look for ways to innovate. Some of your best solutions have really come out of pandemics or crisis kind of situations. And so, there are positives that can come out of this very challenging time. And last but not least, certainly communicate. You can't do that enough with our employees. So some things to consider. This is the time to start looking at your safety plans. Look at your sanitation measures. It's extremely important. So for example, if your office schedules, perhaps you had a thorough cleaning once a week, that may not work now. Particularly for your high traffic areas, you may have to have a plan where you're cleaning something multiple times in a day, for example. So it's really, really important that you take a look at those things. You're going to also have to look at the way we clean. So again, that's not my specialty, cleaning, but I do know that, for example, when you do certain cleaning things, that the solutions have to sit for X period of time, and they'll tell you that on the bottle. So for example, if you go in and you spray something, you wipe it, and you say, oh, I'm done, it's clean, but that product said it needed to dwell for 10 minutes, you really didn't accomplish the sanitation that you thought you did. So again, taking the time to look at those types of things. Promoting healthy hygiene with your employees, whether it be setting up hand sanitizing stations, again, is going to be really important. And looking at where people congregate. So we know we've all heard about the proverbial water cooler, the coffee pot, the copier, things like that. We need to look at that, when we come back into the workplace. It may be a situation where, you have one person who's passing those materials out to people, or you're scheduling time. But any ways that you can kind of limit that congregation will help them to keep the social distancing, help to keep them safe and healthy as well. You want to look at travel. For your employees, for example, is it necessary to travel to a customer site? It may be, depending on your business. It may not be. If nothing else has come out of this situation, we've all learned that we truly can get work done through telework, whether it's with teleconferencing or Zoom. And so when businesses reopen, we don't want to forget those things, because it may be appropriate to utilize that at some level still continuing in the future. Your workplace as a whole, you're going to want to look at that as well. So most companies have kind of moved to what we call more of an open floor plan, because they're known for, building teamwork, a lot of collaboration. Post-COVID, with social distancing, that now presents a challenge for you. Because if we're all sitting, for lack of better words, right up on each other, then we're not able to maintain the 6 feet distance. It's a higher likelihood that we could potentially spread things. We know with COVID, that there's a period of time where people can be asymptomatic. And so even though they're not showing any signs, we want to make sure that we've done everything we can to keep our workforce healthy. And looking at seating is just another way to do that. For some, you may not be able to say, okay, I'm going to get all new office furniture or anything like that, but there are simple things that you can look at. So for example, can I move desks apart? Can I put up a plexiglass like you're seeing in some of the stores? Can I put up a partition? Do I look at way the work is scheduled and people coming in? So for example, do I rotate people in? So instead of having all my employees in at the same time, I do a rotation period and have them sit every other desk. So these are just some examples of ways that you can kind of think creatively to still maintain some of those social distancing, and help people to stay safe. This is also an important time to look at your policies. And there's a variety of policies. I put a few up here for you this morning, but visitors. So again, for many of our offices, things were very open, and we had visitors who would come and go at will. That might need to look differently now, depending on your organization. So for example, do you have people schedule appointments instead of walk-ins, as an example? Do you have a particular designated area that they stay in versus allowing them to walk all through the areas? All of these things, you have to look at. Even if necessary, putting, like you see on some of the stores where they have the arrows this way and things to try to keep people from congregating are all examples. Your benefits, if somebody has been ill with COVID, looking at what does my benefits policy say? Are there waiting periods, for example, before benefits kick in? Leave policies. There's just a ton of things to really look at. One of the things that came out of this pandemic was the Families First, the FCRA, Family First Coronavirus Response Act. And with that was some paid sick leave, for example, that was offered for employers to give to their employees, meaning like 10 days of paid leave. So these are all things that you want to just take a look at, be aware of, make sure that your policies are up to date, or have an HR professional or an attorney to take a look at some of those. Many of us have employees that work on other sites outside of our organization. So with that, as an employer, you're going to want to look and find out what are some of those companies doing, or have they taken a look at OSHA or CDC guidelines? Where possible, I'd encourage you to get something back from them to say, yes, these are some of my sanitation plans, for example, they do comply with OSHA. That does a couple of things for you. One, you've done your due diligence or your homework to make sure that your employees are safe going there. Two, you have something that you can kind of put in your pocket, so if something were to arise, you can show I did my part, to keep my employees safe. And from your employees' perspective, they're going to feel much more comfortable knowing that you've taken those steps to ensure their safety, because many of them are going to come back feeling kind of anxious because you can't, be on the news, radio, social media without seeing all kinds of anxiety producing things about COVID. And last but certainly not least, you want to monitor your employees. Not only, how are they doing emotionally, but are they starting to exhibit any signs, for example, that perhaps they may be ill? There's some organizations have gone as far as testing employees' temperatures. You may or may not choose to do that, but certainly keeping a lookout to make sure they seem to be appearing well is going to be important. Okay. So I'm going to pause for a second. I know we just kind of went through a lot of information. I'm about to go into frequently asked questions, but if there's any questions that you have immediately, let me know. If you want to hold it so that after we go through the frequently asked, that's fine as well.
None from the chat so far too, but if anybody does have one, feel free to unmute yourself as well if you'd rather ask him in person. But of course, lots of more thoughts and questions may arise as we continue.
Fair enough. Okay.
I don't see any so far.
Okay. So the first question that I've gotten a lot of is, we are reopening the business. My employee doesn't feel safe to return to work. What do I do? So the first thing you want to do is have an interactive discussion with that employee. Take the time to understand what their concerns are, where they're coming from. Many times when you hear that it's fear, being able to communicate to them, the safety measures that you've put in place can do a lot to alleviate that fear and help them to feel comfortable coming back into the workplace. So just having that discussion and open conversation is key. You're going to want to listen attentively to see, if there's certain measures that you could do to potentially accommodate them so that they're able to come back in the workplace. So it's important to remember with this COVID-19, if it's, for example, they have some kind of illness, there may be a duty to accommodate them under ADA. So, I encourage you, don't make an immediate, no, you got to come back or you're fired kind of decision, but to have that interactive conversation first to make sure you're staying compliant legally, but you're also meeting their needs. And first and foremost, just getting to hear their concerns, that's validating for them. And for some, that's all they want, is somebody to listen to them and help them work through the process. But with that being said, you may have a couple of people who absolutely refuse to come to work. Some may genuinely believe that there's an imminent danger. So having that listening ear, understanding what their concerns are they valid? Would a reasonable person agree that there's truly a real danger of some type of death or serious bodily injury? Of course, they need to have alerted you that there's some type of danger. And if all of those three elements exist, they may legitimately be able to refuse to come back. So that's why it's important to have that conversation with them. However, with that being said, if there is no real immediate danger of serious bodily injury, there is no, a reasonable person wouldn't find that this is a danger there. You may, and I stress may, be able to terminate them if they absolutely refuse. But what's key is that you go through that interactive process, you listen, you see whether or not there's ways to accommodate them. And I always encourage you to reach out to an HR person or a legal person just to walk through to make sure you've, for lack of better words, dotted your I's, crossed your T's. And then, of course, if necessary, you may be able to terminate their employment if they choose not to return. The next question is, you have an employee who asked, what will you do to keep me safe? And we've talked about some of those measures, but I wanted to give you a list of some things that you can go over with them. Being able to review, the cleaning, the sanitation measures that you're taking and the frequency will help go a long way to alleviating fears and helping people feel like I've been protected. My employer is doing everything that they can do. any physical changes, that you've made to the workplace, updates to travel, eliminating non-essential travel. The next one is one that many companies would not have had in place, but is something you truly want to think about, and that's your communication policy. So what are you going to do if somebody tests positive, for example, for COVID? There is an obligation that we need to go back and let employees know, so that they have an opportunity to get tested themselves, that they can put some safeguards in. So these are things that you want to begin to think about. And, and when I say let them know, I'm not necessarily saying you have to go and say, Jane Doe tested, but at least to be able to say an employee at our workplace, tested positive for COVID. And so these are some things that we've done since then, for example, cleaning of the area, blah, 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 or encourage you to get tested or see your doctor, things like that. Doing those things helps them, feel, I guess, more engaged. It helps to decrease your liability as well as an employer. And some of these others we've talked about, changing shifts and protective equipment. You're going to have some employees who truly like working from home now. They may or may not have had the opportunity to do that in the past, and they really like it, and they don't want to come back. First and foremost, it's going to be important to recognize whether or not this is a fear or preference, because you're going to handle those two things very differently. If it's a fear, we've already talked about working them through that process and helping to process that. If it's a preference, is it okay for you that they work from home? Are they being productive? If not, you do have the right, once we're open businesses, to require them to come back if barring there's any danger in the workplace. The big thing is to basically balance their need versus your business need. So with that, I'm going to stop for any general questions that you may have. Happy to try to answer those for you.
We do have two great questions, Kim. First one is from Kai Johnson, who's here with our chamber staff. He asks, will there be more possible discrimination towards more at-risk groups due to fear of libel suits? And will companies start asking about pre-existing conditions as a screening measure?
Okay. Is there a possibility for more discrimination suits? It's possible. I would highly encourage people not to necessarily start going down the slippery slope of asking about pre-existing conditions, because that, as an employer, can really open you up from a liable standpoint. So sometimes having that knowledge can be challenging. Now, certainly you may have employees who will share with you, I have XYZ condition, I'm in a high-risk group, that's fine. But what I'm suggesting is I don't know that I would actively go out seeking that, because once you have it, that's the slippery slope. So for example, perhaps you have an employee who's already been having problems with performance. And now they share with you that I have XYZ condition, and you legitimately were planning to take disciplinary actions against them because of their performance. But now they've shared this information with you. It could sometimes then be construed, well, that was retaliatory. And so that's why I'm suggesting that I don't know that I would necessarily solicit it if they, bring that up to you from the standpoint of letting you know because they feel like they are scared or they need extra protection or accommodations. That's one thing. So just be very careful with that.
Yeah, and also too, does that, telling the rest of the staff then, doesn't that violate HIPAA?
Well, that's interesting. So with COVID right now, because it's a pandemic, they have said that we can go and kind of have an obligation from the standpoint of safety to be able to tell people that someone in the workplace tested positive. It's not necessary that you have to say it's that specific person, but it is important for them to know that there was someone who may have tested positive. There could have been a potential exposure, for example, because there's also some tracing requirements that they're doing right now to be able to see where this person has been, to make sure other people are tested. So for that reason, you sort of have a carve out where perhaps we wouldn't normally have done that.
Understood. A few more questions as well too. Eddie Peters asks, as you continue to review and revise HR policies and procedures, do you recommend talking with each employee individually to update them accordingly, or should a group setting suffice?
I think it's really up to the company. I mean, I do think that it's fine to even talk in a group setting. I don't know that it's necessary that you have to go one-on-one to each person. If that's your style and you like to, it's certainly, conducive and appropriate to do that. But I think just generally communicating, as a company, these are the measures that I've taken, I've put in place, will go a long way to helping to reassure them.
Hmm, great. Another question, if an employee lives with her elderly parents, can she refuse to return to work, especially since COVID will remain on some level for months to come?
That is, again, we have to go into an interactive conversation with them, understand what their needs are. So, for example, if they are living with their elderly family member, I don't know, for example, if one of those family members has a serious health condition, there could be some protections for them, like under FMLA, for example, family medical leave. Or if one of those elderly parents, for example, or relatives happens to have COVID, then there's the paid sick leave under the FFCRA. You can actually have, it's 10 days of sickness if it's particularly for you, or it could be to care for a relative. And then if they continue to need beyond that and family medical leave is they're eligible, they could have an additional 10. So in total, it's really 12 weeks between the two that they could potentially have of protected leave.
Got it. Another question, what does an employer need to do if an employee tests positive for COVID-19?
First and foremost, if they do test positive, I would highly encourage and have them not be in the workplace. Certainly we want to encourage them to seek the medical care that they need for themselves. Then we want to also make sure that if they've been working on site in the workplace, that we, do a thorough cleaning of the area, that we make people aware that someone tested positive. Depending on how ill they are, they may be able to work from home, for example, during that time period, but you're going to want to make sure that they're out of the workplace, for a period of time. I believe they're saying about 14 days at least, to be out, to make sure that they're symptom free. If possible, to encourage, some type of documentation from the doctor before allowing them back in the workplace.
Wonderful. And also, too, I would add on to that also, there is a statement from Meritus, their executive director, Malik Joshi, on our homepage, hagerstown.org as well, too, that also details some helpful waiting periods and policies as to what to do if somebody does test positive. So that may also be helpful for you as well. We have a question too. Do underlying conditions qualify under ADA?
Potentially. That's, something I would have to really speak one-on-one with the person to understand what the condition is. But certainly ADA does provide some additional protections for accommodations.
And Kim, how do you feel about temperature checks upon entry into premises? There's some people that say it's not quite accurate, and a lot of the science says that too. Of course, if you've been in the cold or if you've been overextended, it's not really a fair, like a temporal scanner isn't quite as accurate. But how do you feel about that?
For me, unless you're in, for example, a medical field, perhaps that may be an extra step. I don't know necessarily that I would encourage every employer to do it. I think, to be honest, the biggest gain that you can have from that is almost helping anxiety perhaps for your employees and staff coming in, because it's a visible thing that they can see that you're doing. But the challenge that I find with it is that people can be asymptomatic for so long that doing the temperature check, and that's only one of the symptoms, may or may not really tell you whether or not this person has COVID. So I think the biggest benefit, to be honest, is more psychological.
Sure.
And helping people feel like you've taken an extra step.
Great. Okay. There's some good conversation in the chat that I'll, let continue, but by all means, Kim, go ahead. And any other questions anybody else has too, keep them coming, and we'll chime back in when Kim's ready for us.
Okay. Well, those were actually the questions, that I had
Oh,
received at
perfect.
this point. I put my information up there. If I can ever be of assistance to anyone, I'm happy to do that. And I really appreciate the opportunity to share with you today.
You bet. And there's one more question here too then. It says, what is your guidance around signing daily disclosure as not symptomatic?
I'm sorry, my guidance about signing a daily disclosure about being a
Yeah, signing daily disclosures around being not symptomatic for employees,
um,
I guess to say.
you know, I think in some ways that again can be psychological. Because again, I guess if we think about it, if they're asymptomatic, the person signing the disclosure is really just saying, to the best of my knowledge, I don't have it. They may not know they have it. And so I don't know that I see a huge benefit in it other than, you know, they it's a visible thing that the company is doing to try their best to keep people safe. But I don't know that it's having the intended result that we really want to try to necessarily keep people out of the workplace who are ill. I think the better thing is probably just to make sure that you encourage good communication from your staff. If you're not feeling well, stay home. Many of us, again, being highly productive workplaces, we always want to encourage people to come in. However, the challenge now, and with that, some people would come in sick, to be honest. Post-COVID, take the pandemic out, people would sometimes come to work when they shouldn't be, whether with the flu or general cold, because they want to, meet XYZ deadline. There's a lot of, concern with doing that. And I certainly want to continue to encourage people to be highly productive, but I don't want them to be so focused on being highly productive that they are not taking safety measures and staying home if they're ill. I'd much rather them communicate to you that I'm not feeling well. You perhaps work out an accommodation, perhaps they can work from home so that they can still work. You get the productivity that you need, but you're not potentially exposing other employees to someone who's ill to have the disease or illness continue.
Wonderful. Okay, so how about everybody else? We have a little bit of time, of course, too.
Mhm.
And I will definitely send out the slide deck, Kim, if that's okay with
Sure.
everybody too. And we're recording it too, so you can hear the conversation as well and play it back at your leisure. But any other questions as well too, feel free to send an emoji. I can always unmute you as well if you'd rather ask your question in person if it's easier to explain. But while we have Kim's expertise at hand here, by all means, feel free to chime in. We'll give it a few moments here.
Okay.
And Kim, we had a question earlier too about the family leave website, and I sent the link from the Department of Labor. Is that probably, you would agree, the best website as well, the DOL.gov link?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
All
Well,
right.
thank you everybody so much. Thank you, Kim.
You're
Very much
welcome.
appreciate your time. And Kim is what. We do have a note here also just saying that her husband's employer is taking everyone's temperature as they enter each morning. So
Okay.
just people weighing in on that as well too.
Sure.
Donna had a good point as well too. Donna Mitchell is our president of Community Rescue Service, and she says that they're actually using digital thermometers to get around this. You could require anyone who has a questionable temperature reading must use an actual thermometer. So
Sure.
disclose that it's questionable or things like that too. So that could be a good workaround.
Absolutely. And I'm not opposed to it. It's just,
Or,
I think it's just more psychological. And the biggest thing is to, if you're going to do it, make sure that you have good, reliable equipment too. I would really invest in a professional grade for thermometer because again, you're using that as a tool to make a decision as to whether or not somebody can come in. So the last thing you want them to do is to be able to kind of question, the veracity of what you're using.
Sure.
Mm-hmm.
Wonderful. And we'll also add this to our website as well too, guys. And if anyone hasn't been to our website lately, there's a lot of good information that we're updating kind of around the clock as things evolve, and including a lot of steps as to how to reopen. So look for that continued from your chamber. And look for more webinars as well too. We'll keep addressing some of these topics that really matter to you guys. So if there's a certain area of expertise that you want some more information on that we can help seek out and produce something, please reach out to us at the Chamber and let us know how we can help. And Kim's information is there on screen. And again, we'll send this presentation to everyone that's registered and Chamber members as well. So thanks again, everyone, for joining us. Have a great day. And Kim, thank you once again.
Thank you. Take care.
Alrighty.
Bye-bye.